everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us today. If you've been playing Airsoft for a while, you may have noticed that there is often one word that is considered taboo or dirty, or at least poorly regarded. I'm talking, of course, about paintball. There's this apparent rift for many airsofters between airsoft and paintball, almost like paintball is a distant relative of airsoft that we don't want to acknowledge or talk about, and who's certainly nowhere near as cool as us. In fact, that sentiment often goes both ways, and paintballers don't want to be lumped in with airsofters. There's a lot of generalizations and stereotypes flying around when it comes to airsoft and paintball, but the fact is that they are more alike than either side would likely care to admit. And in fact, I myself played paintball from around 2001 to 2005 before moving to airsoft. When I started playing paintball, airsoft just didn't exist in Newfoundland, and so it was my only option. We played in the woods at Redcliffe and even at Frontline, the very same places that we play airsoft now. I switched to airsoft in 2006, but aside from the guns and some of the gear, not a lot actually changed with respect to the gameplay. So why is there such a division between airsoft and paintball? To have this discussion, we're joined in the studio by Jeremy. Jeremy is a Storm Riders alumnus. He no longer plays airsoft, but is still an active part of our team. Jeremy's also a lifelong paintballer, so he's the perfect person to have a chat with us about the differences between airsoft and paintball. So Jeremy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So Jeremy, I want to start by just acknowledging that just like in airsoft, there are different types of paintball, right? So I remember there's woods ball and there's speedball. Is that right?
Yes. So there's woods ball, which is probably is a bit closer to airsoft. That's usually what most people get into when they start playing paintball. Toss on a bit of old camo clothes, grab a couple paintball guns, go out in the woods with your buddies, and just have a few games. So there's that, and you've also got speedball. So speedball again is it's more fast paced. It's more colorful. It's definitely way more shooting involved.
So it's your favorite then?
You know what? Have gun, will shoot. That's my preferred thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's airsoft, paintball, laser tag. If you give me a game where you're like, oh, here's a gun, go shoot at some people and have a good time and laugh about it after. It's like, oh man, I will definitely give it a try. So
a few more.
Pretty much, yeah. Actually, it's on that topic. Some of the people I used to play paintball with, we've actually dabbled in a bit of Nerf since then. So
nice.
Have gun, will shoot.
Cool.
But yeah, so with speedball, it's almost more of a sport form of paintball. There's more emphasis on points. There's more emphasis on running, shooting. There's referees involved. It's definitely paintball at a more competitive level. While you've got also woods ball, which is your more recreational game. It's not as competitive. There are still refs, there are still objectives and points, but it's usually generally a very different style of play.
Right. So, it's similar in some respect to how in airsoft you have Milsim Airsoft and you have Speedsoft, right, on smaller fields and...
Well, yeah, and that's, you'll see a lot of videos now with airsoft, especially CQB fields and indoor fields. You'll usually see the term Speedsofter thrown around a lot, where you've got people with these souped up guns, usually wearing paintball jerseys and paintball gear, running around just shooting as much as they can.
Yeah, that's right.
There's perhaps some cross-pollination there.
There is. Well, and I think there's always been kind of the cross-pollination with airsoft and paintball, just because there is a lot of similarities just on the shooting level. Mm-hmm. Right.
That's where we got you, really.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. So most people who are listening to this podcast will likely be familiar with paintball. They likely will have played it before, or if they haven't played it, they at least are aware of what it is. But for those of them who might not be really aware, what are some of the key differences between the play of paintball and the play of airsoft?
So, at the end of the day, the base concept is roughly going to be the same. You have a marker or a gun. You're attempting to shoot your opponent, probably while attempting to achieve some other goal. For speedball, you're trying to get the flag, get points, help your team win. For woods ball, probably a very similar concept. For airsoft, Usually your objectives, depending on the type of airsoft game you're playing, they might be a little bit more military style. But I'd say the big similarities is the core concept. The big differences usually start to appear when you start looking at the goal of the game. So for airsoft, you're usually seeing a lot of the military style gear. You're seeing you're seeing guns that are almost, one-for-one replicas of real-life firearms. The magazines being, you can change out your magazines. Your slide can blow back. There's a more of an emphasis on the military style aspect. You'll see people wearing plate carriers to carry all their mags. You're seeing people run with radios, where in more casual paintball games, that's not gear you see a lot of.
Right. And it's not just about the form either. Like, the function of the guns is not... Aside from the fact that, like, paintball guns shoot paint and airsoft guns shoot plastic, they don't actually function in similar ways, right?
On, like, a very, very base level, yes. For paintballs, they're being launched. It's all air compression.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to the guns and how they perform themselves, you've got paintball guns, which are restricted to a velocity of 300 feet per second or less, depending on the field. I think usually around 280 feet per second. Whereas with airsoft guns, depending on the modifications, depending on your field rules, you can have upwards of 400 feet per second?
Well, we use joules, right?
Well, yeah.
We're currently using what amounts to sort of, 420 FPS limit there, give or take. But where the projectile is so much lighter for airsoft, I imagine the muzzle energy is probably lower than the smack from a paintball, or certainly from a first strike round hitting you with that muzzle velocity.
Oh, absolutely. First strike rounds are brutal. Just get that out there. So when I talk about paintball and airsoft, there's going to be a couple things I'll talk about with paintball a little bit more in specifics, just like first strikes as a great example, because for airsoft, what you're using for equipment, aside from branding and how each individual piece of equipment performs, it's going to be relatively the same. A 6mm BB is a 6mm BB.
Yeah, even though we use fairly precision-made ones because we don't want to sort of risk damage to our gear, there's not a whole lot of difference between, a Mad Bull and a
Griffin.
Yeah, exactly. We've used both. They work the same pretty much.
So that's not the case with paintball?
For paintball, it's similar for your basic 68 caliber ammunition. You're going to have certain brands that are, your entry-level paint that'll perform a certain way. And then you've got your tournament-level paint, which, it is still a 68 caliber paintball. It just performs a little better. The big difference there is since the past couple of years where they started introducing First Strike, where they've changed the design of a paintball itself to have fins. It's more actually now like a rifle round. So they perform drastically different than your standard round 68 caliber paintball shot at 280 feet per second. Now you're starting to use first strikes at 280 feet per second, and these things will travel further. And some people say they don't hit harder. You notice the impact. They don't lose as much velocity in their travel as a 68 caliber round ball would.
So actually, you just mentioned they travel further. So what is the actual effective range of a typical 68 caliber paintball? So in airsoft, we're looking at 150, 200 feet. You're kind of pushing it for stock guns and stuff. More upgraded guns, you can get maybe to 250, 300 feet maximum, right?
Using, say, Frontline's Blackhawk Field as an example, what would you say the length of that is?
The longest angle on that field diagonally is
100 feet.
Well within 100.
Yeah, it's 100 feet.
To use that as an example, because I know how that field plays. I know where if I'm at one point on the field, if I'm shooting my paintball gun, I'll roughly get an idea of where those balls are going to land the other end of the field. And I'd say the length of that field is probably your comfortable engagement range with a paintball. It's enough that despite being at the other end of the field, I can shoot a couple balls, get a gauge, and probably land shots across the field there. So I'd say probably about maybe 100 feet.
Okay. And what's your accuracy at those ranges? When I think about airsoft again, once you're pretty dialed in with a pretty good hop up, you can get within, 1 foot radius basically of your target at those kinds of distances.
With the standard 68 caliber round ball, you're not going to get great accuracy. for paintball, like, and it's interesting. You won't see a lot of people using sights unless they're using something like first strike round, and we'll get into first strike a little bit more later. But the big thing is the accuracy with a paintball is usually accuracy by volume.
Okay.
You'll fire a few shots, gauge roughly where your shots are landing, and then you're going to determine, okay, well, now I can try to hone in where those shots are. So if I know, they're hitting around that corner, okay, well, now if he pops out, I've got to try to land a few shots around that corner.
Right.
Versus, when I played Airsoft, with some of the Airsoft guns that I've used, it was as easy as looking down the optic and going, oh, he's peeking from behind that tree. Flap! Oh, no, he's not.
But you still use that volume. I remember you clearly still using the volume.
Well, it depended on the gun that I used. There were a few guns that I used that Fong did for me that were like that big rifle. That thing was a nail driver, and where I could fire 2 or 3 shots, and I was like, okay, that's a hit. Move on.
So you don't get nail drivers like that in paintball.
Not unless you're using the first strike rounds. There are differences you can make, like. You can get barrel inserts that will size a little bit more to your paint. I mean, yes, it's all 68 caliber paint, but every paint's a little different. So you can get barrel inserts that go in that can range anywhere from 0.679 or smaller up to as large as 0.692, if I remember correctly. You can bore match your paint to that barrel insert, and that will increase your accuracy. That will give you a better shot at landing those hard to hit shots.
So it's more or less a type bore barrel for Airsoft.
Pretty much, yep. Pretty much. But like I said, the accuracy in the versus in the comparison there, a tight bore barrel for Airsoft, like you're going from relatively accurate to nail driver. Where in paintball, it's like you're going from
Broadside of the barn.
I can hit this area versus I can now get that grouping a little smaller.
Right, I get you. And so first strike rounds actually were a complete game changer in that respect.
110%. So with the introduction of the fin to the back of the paintball round, it's they can travel further, they don't lose that velocity, and it functions way more accurately. So, well, for one, paintballs are way more expensive than BBs by volume. You get 2,000 paintballs for locally, let's say $100 Canadian, and at Fields it can be anywhere upwards of $200 Canadian for a case of 2,000. For Airsoft, for a bag of, say, how much is in a bag of Mad Bulls now?
4,000.
So for a bag of 4,000 Mad Bulls, you're paying
$30.
$30.
30, 35. Yeah.
So, there is that disparity there, but for first strikes now, they're a step above again, to the point that like a case of 100 first strikes, considerably, you're not getting 2,000 first strikes for $200.
Yeah.
You're getting 2,000 first strikes for like probably $1,000. Like these things,
50 cents a round is steep.
Well, I mean, and I've seen them like, I'm trying to remember now the exact price, but they are considerably more expensive, but you also don't need as many.
Right, that's fair.
You're going from, well, I need 2,000 paintballs because, I'm going to shoot 500, doing what I'm doing. Whereas with first strikes, it's like, okay, I load my magazine of 20, and odds are I'm going to get 15 hits out of that 20.
So, and I guess the other thing, too, is you can't feed a first strike round to a typical hopper from a paintball hopper. So, again, for people who haven't played paintball before, typically paintball guns are fed by just having a hopper that holds all your balls, and then they just sort of roll into your barrel.
On down into the barrel.
Yeah.
And there's been a few variances over the years. Everyone's kind of taken that and it's like, how can we improve on it? So you'll get your force-fed hoppers with the motor that's just trying to feed the balls as fast as it can down the tube. I remember back when I was playing outlaw ball back before I'd ever moved to town and played on a field. Getting the magazines, and they were talking about these Q loaders, these magazine, these kind of like pods that just kind of spring fed the balls into a tube. Very, very unique stuff. Now, since I moved to town, and there's been more of a development with paintball for Magfed. Mm-hmm. Even just for 68 caliber round balls, there's been more spring Magfed paintball markers.
Okay.
And once First Strike came on the scene, Magfed became a lot bigger because these operated pretty much the same as an airsoft gun. You load your magazine, and they were just spring assisted into the chamber.
Okay. Cool.
And functioned basically as pretty much the same as an airsoft gun did. It fed into your chamber, the air pressure hit it, boom, got it. Mm-hmm.
That sounds cool.
It honestly, like, and that's the cool thing there is that since the development of First Strike and since the kind of change in paintball, well, not the change, but since the development of First Strike, there's been more creation in that regard. So you're seeing more Magfed paintball markers. You're seeing more paintball markers that are actually more similar to airsoft guns than they are, what you would think of when you think of a paintball gun.
I remember back in my day when I played paintball, I had a Tippmann A5.
Yeah.
And it was meant to look aesthetically like an MP5 or an MP5K or something like that. And I had at the time an advancement for it which called it was a flatline barrel, which actually in retrospect actually kind of works like a hop-up does, which is it gave the ball a backspin, so it made the ball supposedly fly a little bit further, a little bit more accurately or whatever.
Absolutely.
And I remember at the time you could get all kinds of kits to make your paintball gun look more like a real gun, but they didn't do anything. Like you get a stock to put your air compressor tank in to make it look like an M4 stock, and you could get like a magazine to hide the actual air line that went to the actual air compressor in your gun, whatever it's called. I don't know what it's called, but you put
your CO2 or your HPA tank.
Yeah, and you would hide that into something that looked like a magazine, so then you ended up with a gun that kind of looked like a real gun, but it was only form. It did nothing. But now, I guess now it's different, right?
Absolutely. So it's funny actually when you talk about that. I own the same gun. I own the Tippmann A5. Love the look. And, I remember buying it at this shop in Halifax, and Buddy was, like, looking at all these kits. He's like, oh, look at all the cool things you can do. You can make it look like an AK. You can make it look like an M4. You could turn this thing into a belt-fed machine gun. It's like, oh, that's really cool. It's like, but you're also going to have this massive round, like, bulge off to the side that holds your hopper and your 200 balls. So it's going to look like an AK with this weird thing jammed on the side.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well...
I mean, that feels very Fallout anyway. Like,
it did. I mean, it did. But like to that degree, at the same time, it's like, well, it's like, so what's this gonna do? It's like, well, it's gonna add about 10 pounds of gear onto your gun. Cool. And what else does it do? It's like absolutely nothing. Like you have the coolest looking space gun now. It's like, all right, well, I'm gonna stick to the A5 for now. But since the development of Magfed guns, you're starting to see things, and you're starting to see some really interesting developments there. So much like your standard airsoft rifle, you load your paintballs into the magazine. You load it up into the magwell, spring fed up into the chamber. As you pull the trigger, it feeds. The magazine runs empty after, say, I think they've got bigger magazines now, but usually 20 to 30 shots. Dump your mag, go on about your day, reload, and continue. So with that... and especially with First Strike rounds where you're getting magazines now that can accept these rounds, where you've got people loading 20 rounds into a magazine and getting your 20 shots off, with a degree of accuracy. With that, it's also kind of changed the design a bit so that you're seeing more M4 style guns. You're seeing, and it's mostly, M4 style platforms where you're seeing these guns that can accept magazines that no longer have this bulge on the side. You no longer have this weird hopper. And in some cases, with the right furniture, it doesn't look like a paintball gun anymore. It looks more like an airsoft gun, really, aside from the barrel bore and stuff like that. But, you'd put the two of them side by side, and for somebody who doesn't play either would look and be like, so, like, I'm looking at, two semi-real guns here. It's like, you absolutely are.
Right. So, and that's an interesting segue, because... I think one of the things that drew me to Airsoft, and I'm sure you and many, many other paintballers, is that Airsoft is just flat out more realistic in terms of the gear and stuff. So I wanted to play soldier, basically, right? Let's not mince words, right? I want to play soldier. It's a lot easier to feel like a soldier or an action hero when you have a gun that looks like a gun and not, like you were saying, like a space gun with a bulge off to the side, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, for looking at that regard, so with Airsoft, you've got the more milsim style. You've got people wearing plate carriers, wearing different uniforms, and kind of setting up loadouts based on that. It's like, well, what do you do? It's like, well, I'm a sniper. Yeah. I have my bolt action rifle. I have my ghillie suit. I have da-da-da-da-da. And, if you said in paintball you were a sniper, it's like, oh, I'm a sniper. It's like, are you? And up until the development of First Strike, it's like, cool. You're going to dress up in a ghillie suit and shoot paintballs at the exact same range that everyone else is.
Yeah.
Where in Airsoft, it's like, oh, well, that guy has a bolt-action rifle that he's tuned up. It's like that thing is going to reach out and touch you compared to someone who's running like a little, say, short-barrel AK.
Yeah. A lot is made of like paintballs going to Airsoft. But it actually sounds to me like there's some benefits to airsofters playing paintball. And I think specifically about one of the things we talk about in a lot of our videos and our podcasts, which is that most airsofters don't actually move. They sit in the same place. They are very hesitant to, be aggressive and move up and close the distance with the enemy. And by the sounds of it, and based on my recollection and based on what we're talking about today, first strike rounds aside, the range on your paintball gun is going to be such that you need to be more aggressive, right?
It's very interesting that you bring up first strike rounds in this regard, because I've actually have come to the conclusion that first strike rounds will make you even more aggressive again.
Okay.
So especially if they're fielded against you. Because there have been a couple instances where I've been on the field, I've known my buddies downrange have first strike rounds, and I have to make a very important decision right out the gate. Okay, at this range, he'll take 1 or 2 shots and he can probably hit me. I'll have to dump 50 to even get close. So then I have to come to the conclusion: how do I beat this guy? He's got me at range. I'm going to dump a lot of paintballs at him. When he tucks in, I'm going to run at him and get closer so I can do my thing, where his advantage is now his round travels a little. It doesn't lose as much velocity. It'll travel a little straighter. It's more accurate. But now I'm within my range that I can do what I need to do more effectively.
Right.
But it's very interesting with the differences between paintball and airsoft in that regard, because, like you said, from my experiences playing airsoft, especially with a lot of new people, they play it and they're like, oh, well, I want to be really tactical. I want to like hunker down and try to snipe or like, hold a position. With paintball, you can do that. It can be effective. But with paintball, usually the thing is it's always been more of a driven, go for the flag, you make the push, make the play. You're going to get shot eventually anyway, so just as well to get shot, get it over with, respawn, get back in the game. You've only got, say for frontline as an example, 280 feet per second of a velocity. You've only got an effective range of 100 feet anyway. The best way to get up on someone and make yourself effective in paintball is to run at them, to be aggressive, to try to get around and get as close as you can to make sure your shot hits.
And I guess it's comparatively a lot easier to see where your rounds are going with paintball than it is airsoft. So you're going to have less of the player shooting and just sitting there and, the guy they're shooting at is 320 feet away watching their rounds hit, 2/3 of the way through them and going, I don't know why that guy's pulling the trigger.
Yeah.
And that's pretty interesting too, because one thing you'll see some paintballers do for aiming is, you're gonna try to get your teeth in. You're gonna fire a few shots and be like, okay, oh, that's where they're landing. Okay, now I know where I'm shooting. So I'm gonna lob a few more, kind of get to see the pattern, and I'll use that to judge my engagement. With airsoft, where you're using those 6mm BBs, usually you've got people like unloading, and in some cases, especially with newer people, they're like, I'm hitting you! And we're like halfway down the field looking and seeing these BBs come in like hailstones and just watching them land in front of us. And we're like, no, you're not!
Well, I mean, they're so small. Like,
it is.
Once they're past like 40, 50 feet, you can't see them anymore anyway.
Absolutely.
Right?
You lose track of them once they go in the air, up until the point you'll see someone raise their hand. Or unless you're using a magnified optic where you're watching the BB drop.
Right, yeah.
You're basically shooting and watching, seeing where, trying to listen for cues. It's like, is it hitting off wood? Is it hitting off anything?
Yeah.
Is he tucking in? Like, am I getting close to him? Are the bushes moving when I shoot? Whereas with paintball, it's like, okay, I can see that 68 caliber paintball go. Again, first strike is a little different. It's traveling a little faster. You're still seeing it, but it's more straightforward. It's less, I have to track and see where that ball lobs versus, okay, that's where it went.
Yeah, fair enough. You also mentioned velocity a couple of times, and we want to sort of address this because I think it's both sort of a myth and also reality that paintball hurts a lot more than airsoft. And from my experience, paintball definitely does. It definitely hurts. Now, whether it's a lot more than airsoft kind of, I think, would depend on where you get hit,
well,
right?
It's the factors, where you get hit, the adrenaline rush you're into. I mean, there are times that I've been lit up by paintballs, and, it's not until after I'm walking off the field that I'm like, oh, ow, oh, what the... Because, you're in the adrenaline, you're running for something, you're doing an objective, you get bunkered, some dude runs up on you as you're not expecting it. It definitely, you'll feel the impacts a little more, but like you said, the adrenaline rush, the amount of gear you have on, all that's going to factor in.
Most paintballers, or a lot of paintballers that I've seen, also wear equipment that is more protective than airsoft equipment. And what I mean by that is like you look at an airsoft BDU, like a standard set of trousers and a shirt or whatever. There is no inherent padding or protection in that. That's just clothing. Right now, you might wear a plate carrier, or you may not. I'm wearing a chest rig right now, and I get hit in the chest, and it stings a little bit more or whatever. But there's nothing that I'm wearing is specifically designed to protect me from a BB. Like it might be a helmet or knee pads or whatever, but with paintball, I remember I saw Keats at the field, and he's wearing like these pants that obviously have padding on them, right?
So again, and like that can come down to a lot of the paintball gear is dual purpose. Like I even when I played airsoft, I wore paintball knee pads. Mm-hmm. Because my God, they never went anywhere.
Right, yeah.
If I ran and slid, they were staying in place. If I, just had to drop down on a bunch of rocks and I dropped on my two knees, it felt like I was laying on a cloud. There was a lot of comfort there.
That's a definite benefit.
I also remember some paintballers like wearing like almost like Predator dreadlocks kind of thing. Like it's a hat that drapes over their neck or whatever.
The thing with paintballs and stuff like that, the protective gear, you'll see a lot of speedballers wear a lot of undergear or arm pads, maybe, gloves, knee pads, stuff like that. And that's dual purpose. It's for the running, the sliding, the, landing on your knees, landing on your elbows, stuff like that. But it also does take away some of the impact of that paintball. And depending on where you get shot, it can really, really suck. Like, you take the knuckles, elbows, anything with exposed skin. Mm-hmm. Here's a really interesting distinction, too. Airsofters will usually wear what, you'd expect somebody in the military to wear. Form-fitting BDUs, your plate carriers. You're not trying to have anything loose or dangly.
Yeah,
you're not,
totally.
With paintballers, it's the opposite. You'll usually see paintballers wearing very loose jerseys, wearing more baggy stuff. And that's mainly so that the impact when the paintball hits it, it's less likely to break, which most paintball fields are break ball. If the paintball breaks on you, you're out. So they'll wear this loose-fitting clothes so that the paintball will hit it, but rather it will bounce off. Mm-hmm. It won't have that tightness to hit and explode on. It'll just bounce off a baggy jersey. And that's the interesting thing with those Predator dreadlocks. I don't know if they ever caught on. I remember there were a couple of people local who wore them, and you'd see them in a couple videos. I don't know if the company has been, mass producing them or anything like that. But again, similar concept, layers of and strips of this fabric that when a paintball would hit it, it was less likely to, hit something solid like your mask, and it would hit these layers of fabric and just roll off.
Yeah.
And of course, it was great impact absorption. Just layers, the more layers you have, it's absorbing the impact. So even with that 68 caliber paintball traveling at 280 feet per second, it's going to absorb the impact by hitting, layers of fabric. And again, there's also a distinction of whether the paintball bounces versus whether it breaks. If the paintball breaks, you're getting that force, it's breaking on you. If it bounces and you've got baggy clothing on, sometimes you might not even feel the impact as much.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns it into a deflection rather than just the mass being transferred to you directly, I guess.
So this is interesting because this also sort of raises another big difference between airsoft and paintball. So we talked about how, there's a difference in range and accuracy, right? So, and as a consequence of that, there's a difference in like how aggressive you need to be. Mm-hmm. There's also a difference in the equipment that you wear, but a lot of that also comes from the fact that in airsoft, if you're hit, you're hit. Whereas in paintball, I remember my experience and what you were just talking about, breakball, for you to actually be able to be hit, the ball actually has to break, right? You have to have a mark. So that would likely mean that for most airsofters, there would never be, compared to airsoft, there would never be any not hit calling. That's not something that would happen in paintball, where it does. We know it, unfortunately, we know it happens in airsoft.
So with paintball, it's a little interesting, and again, it's depending on what you're doing. With speedball, not hit calling is interestingly enough part of the game, and that's why there's so many refs on the field. That's why there's so many people watching. So you'll see people get hit and the ball will break, and then you'll see them immediately rub up against the bunker that they're getting shot at, and the ref is coming over and it's like, oh, you're hit, and you'll see the player arguing, oh, it's bunker rub, it's paint from the bunker, it's fine, it's nothing like that. You didn't see that, so there is that for the speedball aspect. With woodsball, again, it's a little more direct, it's a little more, you get shot, paintball breaks, you're out. Mm-hmm. Now, the other side of it is, it also depends on, what you're doing, what your goal is, who you're playing with. Like, the group I play paintball with, the Trolls, they've always had an honor ball system in place. It was never break ball for the Trolls.
Okay.
It was, if the ball hits you, you're out. We're not going to worry, like, and we're self-regulated. So it's like we've never had to have somebody out there watching us.
Right.
Because it was always, listen, you get hit, there's not going to be a moment where you're like, oh, did that break? Did that break? Ref, paint check. It's just, okay, listen, you feel it, you take your hit, walk out the field.
Right.
And that's more of a casual community gaming experience rather than something more competitive.
Right, okay. So an airsofter coming to paintball who's never played paintball before is going to get a shock because the guns have nowhere near the amount of range that they're used to from airsoft. Nor do they have any amount of accuracy, unless they're somehow playing paintball for the first time and they're given
and
a
they
first
decided to
gun.
pick up a first strike.
Yeah, right. So the average, like,
Oh, dear.
average person playing an average game, renting maybe paintball gear at a store is not going to be renting a first strike gun. So, you're going to get the shock of how close you need to get, right? And then there's also going to be the shock around how much it hurts, right? So we talked about that a little bit. So we talked about how in paintball you're going to wear this like loose-fitting clothing to try and absorb some of these hits so it doesn't hurt as much. But the fact is, you get hit in paintball, depending on where it hits, you were saying, it can really hurt. Now, thankfully, you're wearing, generally speaking, a full face protection, right?
Well, and that's a big thing. You'll see it, like I said, in the 80s when paintball first kind of started making its moves. You'll see people running around with just a pair of safety goggles and no lower face protection.
And then they learn.
Well, it wasn't too long after that you started getting the paintball masks, with the mouth covers with full face protection,
and even the ears too, right?
Absolutely, hard coverage for the ears.
I get shot in the ear in Airsoft with an Airsoft BB, and that's awful. I do not want to get shot with, like, if you're saying first strike rounds hurt more than a regular paintball in the air. No, thank you.
So paintball's even gone like a little step further. Like, oh, you can get masks that are full head shields.
Can I just get like a big stormtrooper helmet from Star Wars? Just like wear that.
As long as it's got the rating for the goggles, absolutely. The big thing is, depending on what they're used to wearing, the mask might be a bit of a change. I know like a lot of airsofters prefer to wear just goggles and something very loose for lower face protection, maybe a balaclava, maybe a mesh mask, maybe just a schmog or a scarf, and some choose not to wear anything at all.
Yeah.
With paintball, that's not an option. I mean, you may see some fields allow that, and I've seen some fields like even allow the mesh masks that you see in Airsoft, and I mean, I've seen the damage that a paintball can do, especially at close range. Obviously, you're trying not to shoot people point blank, but sometimes, with anything, it happens.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't come, it's a shooting sport. If you didn't come to get shot, you picked the wrong sport.
Absolutely. Right? And with the amount of force that I think a paintball would do at that range, especially, on an unprotected face, I shudder to think of someone getting shot in the mouth or like you said, like in the ear with a paintball. Good God.
So, it's interesting, though, because for a lot of airsofters, and like Pat just expressed, very, very clearly, it's like, it hurts more, no thank you, right? But I'm actually thinking about this in the context of how would an airsofter actually benefit from playing paintball?
So, there's a couple interesting things there. For one, like, as someone who's played both, the aggression you get in paintball, definitely a factor. That is something that would transfer over really, really well between the two. Because, a lot of people, like you said in Airsoft, when they get out there, they're like, okay, I'm going to pick and hunker down. I'm going to do... It's like, when you're playing paintball, it's like, okay, you don't really have that option. Let's get aggressive. And you start noticing that when you start getting aggressive in other shooting sports like Airsoft, people don't expect that. Mm-hmm. Especially, it's like, we've got 3 guys in this building, we're gonna hunker down, and then some dude just runs in and just goes, bah! It's like, whoa, where did he come from?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I've shot you guys, I'm on to the next one.
Yeah.
That aggression is definitely a factor.
So this is the source of your run and scream playstyle.
Pretty much. That's who I am as a person, and it just translates really well into paintball, and it translated well into Airsoft too. The other thing, especially like the screaming actually is a really good point. Communication. You don't usually see people using radios in paintball.
I imagine that the radios have trouble getting shot with a paintball gun in much the same way that my face does.
Absolutely. You see it for bigger games, big scenario games, stuff like that. I know when the Trolls went down, they played Super Game at Portland, Oregon. I believe a couple of them brought down some Baofings. But it's not as common as you see in Airsoft, where you'll see, a team, everybody's running a radio. So with that, the communication in paintball is usually very direct and very loud. I always, tell people, especially when they're getting into paintball for the first time, it's like, listen, you keep communicating. You keep telling me where people are. So the moment I get on the field, I don't shut up until I'm off the field.
Yeah.
Because
I've noticed.
Well, I mean, for me, that's like, I always say it, it's like, if you want to think of it in like a video game, you think of like in Call of Duty when you get the UAV and all of a sudden you're pinging people on the map, and every time that's what your voice is.
Yeah,
you're pinging people. Your buddy who's tucked away in a corner getting shot at, who can't see what's going on, and you've got a better angle. Well, now you're yelling, hey, left side, he's 50 out, he's at the 50. Oh, got one moving up on your right. And everything is communicated through these yells back and forth. And that communication, that verbal communication is very important in paintball, whereas in Airsoft, you can have that radio and you can whisper and you can go, hey, 2 in that building, over there. If you go around your left, you can flank them. Where even in some of the different game types of paintball, like speedball, you're not going to have radios in speedball. It's way too quick. It's way too short range. You've got maybe a couple feet between you and everybody anyway.
You're not going to have the operational sort of distance either in a lot of game modes for paintball if your range is that much shorter than ours. Like,
absolutely. And everything happens a lot quicker. Where in Airsoft, you could sit back, you can watch somebody through a nice magnified optic and go, okay, so I'm going to wait till he gets in range, I can radio my buddies. Where in Speedball, it's like the moment the whistle blows, you're within shooting range, it's like 30 balls per second on either side, there's like 5 guns on either side with 200 round hoppers, and it's just constant gunfire and screaming.
That's interesting because, one of the things we often talk about in our videos, again, is you need to communicate. So an Airsofter would actually learn a lot from communication in paintball that they could then translate back to Airsoft, because you mentioned just now, you're not going to have this luxury in paintball to just whisper into your radio. But the fact of the matter is, even in Airsoft, people who have radios or don't, doesn't matter, they're not communicating enough anyway, right? You are in a situation where you could be shouting to your buddy, hey, there's one at the 50, he's moving the right to left or whatever. I do that all the time. I watch some of the video footage that I take during games for videos, and all of it is pretty much just me shouting at people stuff that I'm seeing, right? Unless I'm being sneaky or whatever. But it's all me just communicating with people and people on our team, and I think that's where we've become very effective, is talking to each other and passing information along, right?
This is all very general too, because speedball is going to behave differently than woodsball. And with the inclusion of first strike compatible markers, you're seeing more of these people using radios, being stealthy, because now they have a bit more of that accuracy. They have a bit more of that range. They can do more stealthy stuff, so you're seeing that more milsim element now to, say, woodsball. Speedball, again, completely different beast. It's bright colors, gunfire, and screaming.
Totally. And I mean, we say that in our podcast too, and our videos. It's like, if you're coming to us for Speedsoft advice, you're in the wrong place, right? Yeah. You really are talking about like milsim and,
Absolutely.
more like tactical gameplay. So
it's not so much our skill set.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that really struck me, and we talked about the pain aspect, and I want to come back to that, because a lot of people in Airsoft are afraid of being hit by BB because it hurts, right? And I have been that person, and in some days I still am that person. I'm really concerned about taking a corner. It's just, we have worked and trained enough that our muscle memory takes over and we just don't think about it. Like, I take a corner, I'm not concerned about getting hit anymore because I have a job to do and I need to interact with the field. But it's still there. I don't want to get hit. I expect that if you're an Airsofter and you're afraid of getting hit in Airsoft because it hurts, and you go to paintball, you're in for a rude awakening.
Absolutely.
But it gives you the perspective, right?
The other cool thing too, and it's funny that you talk about that, is the other side of it is just the impact of paintball alone, not necessarily on you, but on cover and your whatever terrain you're using as cover. So Airsoft at Frontline is a great example, because the different types of terrain and cover they have, like with sheet metal and stuff like that. If a 6mm BB hits sheet metal at, regardless of the velocity, you're going to hear the ping.
Yeah.
Just ding, 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 ding. And it's almost like someone's ringing a bell. It's not super loud, but you're like, okay, I'm getting shot at. Like, on that same vein, where if someone's shooting a 68 caliber paintball at you, the sheet metal is shaking. There's a rattle. There's a thump. There's an impact. And it's funny because, like, with an Airsoft, I always love the cool military style of the gear, the equipment, and, I'm there, I'm like, okay, I'm taking cover, I'm taking shots, and then, like, I'm tucked in the cover, and I'm hearing ding, 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 ding. I'm like, huh. Whereas when I hit cover in paintball and I hit cover, I'm like, okay, I'm getting shot. Oh god, the dirt's getting kicked up, the cover's shaking, like, you know. So there's that. It's a little bit more of the adrenaline rush, you know. But yeah, no, it's really really cool in that regard. That impact is there. Like there's something it's always said, man. If I could have the impact of paintball in an airsoft package with the gear, you got it.
Yeah.
And you're starting to see that a little bit more now with Magfed guns and the Milsim development paintball side of things, but it's still not quite the same. There's still a lot of big differences. The impact alone of paintball is, if you're coming from Airsoft to try out paintball, the best thing to say to you is get shot and get it over with. Once you get used to it, once you take that first impact and you realize that, much like Airsoft, with that adrenaline rush, with the gear you have on and stuff like that, you'll notice it a lot less. So, and actually that's interesting, because I'd like to bring up you mentioned hit calling earlier.
Yeah.
So, you know, with paintball versus Airsoft, you'll get instances, at least it was my experiences, of people, you know, not calling their hits. It's like I shot a bunch of BBs at that guy, I clearly saw the BBs hit him, and he never calls hits. And the first initial thought is, you know, usually it's like, why is he cheating? Why is he doing that? When coming then from the other side of it, you're wearing a plate carrier. You're wearing a padded plate carrier. You're wearing a BDU. You're wearing maybe thermal undergarments depending on if it's cold outside. You're then running from corner to corner like a madman, and you really don't want to get shot, and the adrenaline is pumping. You may honestly just not feel it.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
100, like, you know, you might come home later and lift up your shirt and see little welts, and you're like, oh man, he did hit me. What? Man, I didn't And with paintball, for people who are like, oh man, I totally didn't feel that, it's possible, but the impact is a lot more. Like, you're running, and if you get shot with 6 or 7 paintballs, especially in an effective range, rather than just, you know, someone just lobbing balls in at you, you feel the thump, thump, thump.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then, of course, like you said, there's the marking aspect. You put your hand down, it's like you come away sticky with paint on it. You're like, okay, well, I'm hit.
Yeah, and especially you were saying earlier, like, if it breaks on you, you're getting the full force of that impact. You're going to feel it. Like, it's, you know, is it possible you won't? I mean, anything's possible.
Well, again, it depends on the adrenaline rush. I mean, you know, there are people out there who, you know, in real combat situations, that after combat and they catch their breath, they stop and realize they have blood coming out. It's like, oh man, I've been shot. How'd that happen?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's not impossible for, even in paintball and Airsoft, with anything, for that, if the adrenaline is up, depending on the circumstance, the situation, what you're doing. It's just with paintball, it's a little bit more likely that you'll notice the impact, versus with Airsoft, it can be a little more unlikely. Right, with the factors that we mentioned.
And to your point, I think too, like, once you get it out of the way and you get hit and stuff and you get used to it, when you rotate back to Airsoft, you're not necessarily going to be afraid of that BB in the same way that you were before.
Absolutely.
Simply because you've had it worse. You know, it's like you get punched in the face by Mike Tyson, and then then it's some guy downtown. Like, I've had it worse. I'm not afraid
it's
anymore.
Still going to hurt. It still kind of sucks, but not to the same degree of suckage.
Totally. It gives you perspective, right? Ultimately. I think, you know, we often talk about in this podcast and your videos about how we totally recommend that people try stuff out, like new pieces of kit, try it out, see what it's like, give yourself some perspective. And it sounds to me like there's a lot of good perspective to be gained for an airsofter checking out paintball.
See, the big thing for me is, you know, there may be like a little bit of, oh, well, airsoft's this, paintball's that. It's like, oh, we're two very different things. It's like, you know what? At the end of the day, I say, for any airsofter out there, go to a paintball field. You don't have to tell people you're an airsofter, because, again, there is sometimes a bit of a stigma. People are going to razz you. Don't worry about all that stuff. Go out, try it out, and just see what it's all about. You know, you might come away enjoying it. You might come away being like, well, no, airsoft is the way I want to go. But there's definitely a lot of interesting perspective and a lot of different habits you'll notice of the two gaming communities of airsofters and paintball. And I highly recommend for both sides to try the other, because it's an opportunity to learn something different, meet different people. It's another skill set, and you would be very surprised about the amount of interchangeable skills, and there's a huge commonality there. You're a bunch of people who like to get dressed up in gear, and go out and shoot at each other and walk away laughing after. And that, at its core concept, I mean, whether you play paintball, whether you play airsoft, come to the realization that as different as it may seem, you guys got more in common than you think.
For sure, and I think you just mentioned it, but there's all these common skills. Like at the end of the day, you're just adding an extra tool in your toolkit, right? If you learn how to bunker properly in paintball, that's a skill that you can then transfer to airsoft, which you might not otherwise have gained if you'd never played paintball, right?
Absolutely. And even bunkering. Like, you watch some speedballers when they go and try to make a run of the field. And their goal is, well, I'm going to get from one end of the field to the other and eliminate as many people as I can. Watching them and how they use their paintball marker and how quick they are for bap, 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 target acquisition. Okay, next guy, next guy, next guy, next guy. And you'll see the gun shifting and you'll see the shots. And it's almost just second nature for them. You watch a speedballer do that, and then watch somebody in airsoft do the same thing, and you'll see a lot of the same skills. You'll see the gun snapping, how quickly they acquire the targets, how quickly they put the shots down, and you'll see a lot of very interchangeable skills there. Absolutely.
Cool. So I guess, guys, if you never considered playing paintball coming from airsoft, you might just find that that's exactly what you need to even bring your skills to a next level in airsoft, right? To learn to be more aggressive, to learn to fear the hit a little bit less, and to just overall make yourself a better airsofter by learning different skills, giving you some better perspective.
And have some fun.
It's all for fun. You know, aside from the scattered paintballer out there who's playing competitively at, the Florida level, which, again, very, very rare, no one's making any money at this.
Yeah, that's right.
We're all out here to dress up, shoot at each other, and at the end of the day, laugh about it, have a bit of fun. It's all about the community and having fun, regardless of what you do.
Well, Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us in the studio. Really appreciate your perspective and your comments today. Guys, hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in.